understand that God the Father married Israel through a will and testament. This will and testament gave Israel marriage unto God, whereby it gave also therein a covenant that required being obedient to the husband, God the Father. If Israel did not be obedient to the covenant of the testament, the blood of animals, then Israel would then die. The law required it. They would be punished and they were to die. This is the covenant within the agreement within the covenant of the testament. This is what God ordained. This is what God purposed. Now it must be understood that God would not compromise. The Ten Commandments and law are righteous. Well, let me explain this first. First, it's necessary to know that the knowledge of good and evil is God-like. And there's a condemnation that goes with not following God-likeness of knowing right from wrong. Through the knowledge of good and evil, that opened the door where God can send the Ten Commandments and the laws. The Ten Commandments and the laws are like an educational system, kind of like going to college. It was a higher educational system to the knowledge of good and evil, where man not only knew the basics of right and wrong, but man knew greater sin against God. Sin became exceeding sinful through the Ten Commandments and the law. And Israel was condemned by it. God gave man to die. He killed Israel in generations as they rebelled against God. To try to speak in summary and summarize it down, not going too far, I want to give it just to be understood in the basics that there was the law given to Israel. The law was given as a covenant of the Testament, what we today call the Old Testament. Abraham, start from the back, Adam and Eve, down to Noah, all the way down to Abraham. They were not under the Old Testament. Everybody don't know that. That needs to be understood. They were before the Old Testament was ever given by Moses, Abraham's great-great-great-great-great-grandson. Moses wrote the first 4 books of the Bible, and he recorded the things that occurred for the children of Israel in his time to know their history. Even Genesis 1 of how God created the world. God gave that to Moses on the mountaintop. Kind of like he gave to John the wrote Revelation, things that were to come. God showed Moses things that were in the past. And Moses wrote. So Adam and Eve were not under the First Testament. They were before it. Noah was not under the Old Testament of the law. He was before it. Abraham was not under the Ten Commandments of the law or under the Old Testament. He was before it. Joseph was not under the Old Testament. He was before it. But Moses wrote of them so that when he came to Israel and presented the law and told them that Elohim was their God, they would also know their history so that they may understand their origin of God and of their fathers, to perceive and understand him as their God. God likes to break things down and simplify that you may truly know him and who he is. God gave the law to Moses, Abraham's great-great-great-grandson. It was ordained of angels. Since I explained that, it's necessary to give this to be understood also. In the New Testament, Jesus Christ was not under the New Testament. When you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Acts of Christ, he was not under the New Testament. Everybody don't know that. The New Testament is his will and testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote of Jesus' coming, his birth, his life deeds, and his death, to make it known who he was, and that men may understand his will and testament. He had the authority and power to leave a will and testament. So they record the life of Jesus, who left his will and testament, gave his will and testament, as recorded in the closing of the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The New Testament is his will, which came into force at his resurrection, of his blood that was shed after he was dead. That blood came into force at his resurrection. But he was not under the New Testament. It is his will and testament. There are certain basic things that need to be understood before the Bible can be understood. Certain basic facts. It's not good enough for man to just go through traditions each weekend, each Sunday, or the Sabbath. Actually, Saturday is actually Sabbath. It's not good enough for men just to go through traditional performances or traditional rituals. There needs to be knowledge and understanding. So the First Testament, now called the Old Testament, was a will and testament. God gave a will and testament of the blood of animals. He's God, he could do that. And he enjoined Israel to a will and testament to give them the hope of an inheritance into heirship and the family of God, of Elohim. Even to be married to God the Father through the will and testament that he gave of the blood of animals. God knew that animals' blood could not give a will to give man inheritance. God knew that the blood of animals could not wash away man's sin or substitute for man's sin. But this was given as a substitution to man, that through him giving the law, man would come short anyway. But man would learn of his shortcomings from being worthy of being a part of the family of God. So that men would see the need of accepting Christ when he came. So it's necessary to understand that the First Testament that was ordained of angels and was given to Moses, who was the mediator, it was a will and testament. And through that will and testament, man, Israel, that is, married God the Father. Now, when Israel continually rebelled, and the world also learned of the law of Moses that God had given to Israel, as they learned, many of the people of the world learned of the law, it condemned them the greater. When God sent Christ, the knowledge of good and evil, and the Ten Commandments